Welcome to the MarTech Matrix, the podcast that cogently uncovers the business problems each tech company was built to solve. Today, Sean speaks with Greg Stellato, founder of M3, a company helping specialty retailers generate revenue through curated brand partnerships while giving advertisers access to dedicated audiences in trusted environments. They will be discussing the future of brand advertising and how strategic partnerships can drive value for everyone, including the consumer. After the show, head on over to themartechmatrix.com for show notes, contact information, and details on upcoming episodes. Now, get ready to enter the Matrix.
Greg, welcome into the Matrix. How are you doing today?
Appreciate it, Sean. Thank you. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm well, thanks. We're happy to have you here. I want to jump right in. Your website, you are unabashedly direct about M3's objective. Quote, make merchants money. Hence M3, I imagine. I love that. So let's dive into the nuances of your objectives and your vision for the future of brand advertising. Can you start with giving the audience a very high-level vision of M3?
Yeah, no problem. So we are unabashedly about M3. So it does stand for Make Merchants Money. It also stands for Make Media Matter, which we'll get into later from the advertising point of view. But the high-level vision is that the retailers, it's tough to be a retailer. Retail margins are thin, conversion rates are low, and traffic acquisition is high. So we create a new revenue stream for them through brand advertising and sponsorship opportunities with Fortune 1000 advertisers.
Got it. Okay. So your website speaks to helping specialty retailers, advertisers, and consumers. So essentially, it's a three-sided marketplace. But was there a specific business problem that you set out to solve when you started to build the company, and what sparked the idea and its evolution?
Yeah, definitely. So my co-founder, Michael Cassidy, he was the founder and CEO of Undertone, which is a brand advertising company. He had left that and he bought a few different ad agencies, Spotify Plus agencies, and one of those being BVA. So he got very acquainted with the merchants, the term used for retailers within the Shopify ecosystem, and saw how difficult it was to be a retailer. So the problem that we set out was, again, that the retail margins are very thin. Conversion rates are really low. Traffic acquisition is high. The disruptive forces that retailer faces, those, again, margin strain, slowing demand, and then plus returns, it's tough. And it really compounds when you have about a 2% conversion rate across the board for e-com. So we set out, how can we generate additional revenue for them that is highly profitable? And we looked at retail media and commerce media in whole. And how can we bring that to specialty retailers? And then from the advertising side, I spent the last decade or so on the supply side, and I saw the squeeze and the kind of race to the bottom for cheap reach. And there's not that many premium opportunities for advertisers these days across the open internet and even on social with the influx of ads. So how do you offer them a brand safe premium experience? And one of those is to turn these retailers basically into media properties themselves, which we can talk about in a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talk a lot about when I talk about my background, 20 years ago, MarTech wasn't really something that was a term. I don't even think ad tech was. When I was a media buyer, which is even longer ago than that, in the 90s, when digital first started, I had media plans with 100 media companies on there, right? Literally 100 websites I had to deal with. I had to get reports every week from them. They were all made up, but I had to aggregate them and present them to my client. But that doesn't happen anymore, right? Now you just go to the Trade Desk or you go to a DSP and you go to Meta and you have a couple platforms that you buy off of, and you buy mass impressions. And so, to your point, that branding experience doesn't exist. For a little bit of time, I worked at broadcast.com, which was AudioNet, and got bought by Yahoo. And what I really enjoyed about selling that was, Intel was a client of mine, being able to sell music festivals that we were streaming online. It wasn't called streaming back then, but we were broadcasting online, and Intel got the sponsorship of the stream, but also at the venue. So we created this sort of wrapped opportunity, and that doesn't seem to exist anymore. So I really like what you guys are doing there. Um, how is this different from retail media?
Yeah, and to go to your point there, like those are pretty cool experiences, and they're few and far between nowadays. And like you look at Airbnb 2 years ago, where they announced, and it was all over all the trade hubs of how they were basically going brand marketing and getting rid of performance marketing, and they exponentially saw that impact their brand in a good way. So there are some marketers that are doing that. And there's a lot of brand marketing that happens still, and a lot of it goes to CTV or out of home or whatever it might be. But online, it's pretty tough to do. It still happens, but to buy a premium publisher, premium means something different to everybody. And like I've seen over the years that term used within the agencies, and the agencies just like glaze right on over because everyone says they're premium. But at the end of the day, you mentioned the reports being made up. Like there's a lot of just third party vendors that are just buying and reselling, buying and reselling, buying and reselling. They don't offer anything premium. They might have like a premium ad creative. They don't own that inventory or exclusive to them. So you're better off as an advertiser working directly with a publisher if you want that premium experience. And then from your question about what's different from retail media today is built for marketplaces. Do you think of Amazon, you think of Walmart, you think of Target, those are marketplaces that sell tons of different goods. A lot of that's sponsored listings. I think about 70% of what is considered retail media happens off-site. So all that remarketing that happens across the social channels, but also across the open internet through the ads and drive you back to the retailer. That's what retail media is today. It's not built for specialty retailers. Those retailers that sell their own products, their own goods. You would never see, and Yeti's not a client of ours, but you would never see a Stanley ad on Yeti.com. It just wouldn't make sense. It's competitive. Retail media just isn't built for them right now. So what we're doing is we're using these retailers as a proxy for context and saying, hey, advertiser, these retailers have spent so much time, money, and effort building their brands. They have these trusted environments that are brand safe to you and these dedicated audiences that are built in that shop there. And wouldn't you like to be aligned with that? It's where your audience already is.
Yeah,
so that's what's different between the retail media and what we're doing. It all kind of falls within that commerce media ecosystem. We're delivering partnerships on a e-commerce environment, but that's kind of where the similarities are.
Yeah, and just to break that down a little further, I think the retail media side, using your Stanley and Yeti example, you might see a Stanley ad around Yeti products because if the marketplace sells both products, right? Because the marketplace is trying to sell as many products as possible. They don't care about your brand as much,
totally.
right?
Go to Amazon and the first 10 search results are sponsored listings. But if you went to Yeti.com, you would never see that.
No, and I think we back that up a little bit. I think it's because of we're victims of our own measurement requirements, right? And so I think for the longest time, since the beginning, it's all about the CTR and the cost of sale or the CPA or whatever it might be, and it's a race to the bottom, right? Which is why you have to buy cheap media. The cheaper the media, the better the return. So that's the idea, right? That you can get more volume, you get more returns, but it comes at a cost, and that's your brand. And so, and I think the one thing that held brands back for a long time, advertisers, I should say, in your context, is that it was difficult to measure. And we got so hooked on the idea, it's like a drug, right? We can measure something, so we should. And for the longest time, you couldn't measure brand effectiveness the same way you could measure a click. Certainly you could do brand studies, and it's still a little bit different. It wasn't in real time. But now I think the advancements in measurement with mixed media modeling and incrementality, all of a sudden you're able to understand the impact of that upper funnel media on your lower funnel numbers or on your revenue. And so you can make decisions about brand advertising as it relates to your ROI. And so I think this opens the opportunity for an M3 to go get some of those brand dollars and tell brands, hey, push up funnel a little bit because you can measure it and it's going to protect your brand and maybe perform better.
Maybe that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
I think you said that very well. And the whole measurement and data, it is a drug. And if you look into it, it depends on who you listen to, but a lot of that is not accurate data, or it's manipulated pretty easily. Whether it's from last touch attribution, conversions, whatever it might be, you can splice and have as much data as you want, but like at the end of the day, you don't need 300 data points to tell you that a new mom is shopping on motherhood.com or carters.com. And that's kind of what we're leaning into, is like, hey, you could go buy a premium publisher today, and as you probably should, depending on whatever your goals are as a brand. But the index of who you're trying to reach is much more concentrated on a specialty retailer site, where they're shopping and their mindset's different, where they're looking at products. They're not reading content that they were driven there by some social ad or whatever it might be. Like, they're there to potentially spend money and be influenced on their decision of what they want or what they need. So as an advertiser, depending on who you are, it might make sense to line up with there, and then you don't have to pay for the different data attributes that you might through your DSP. And one of the quotes that I had from an advertiser was, you get that one ad to the one person who's already seen your ad 7 times, and it's the husband that's actually looking at it. So not the wife. So the ad doesn't matter anyways, but I just spent a lot of money on all the data to get that ad to that person. And we try to eliminate that by saying, hey, here's a retailer or a set of retailers within that particular audience that you're looking to reach. Let's say, I'll use a pretty easy example is like, if you're on a Samsonite or a Tumi shopping for luggage, it's most likely because you're going somewhere. You either need new luggage or whatever it is. So wouldn't that be great for Delta, for Marriott, for Hilton, for all these advertisers that want to reach you as a consumer? Why not reach them in the place where they're going to buy some luggage? Or if you're on a motherhood and it's because you're a new mom, or whether it's your first kid or your third kid, you need maternity clothes, or if you're on Carter's because you need baby clothes, like, that's a perfect place for you as an advertiser, for your needs to reach that individual in a brand safe environment where you have 100% share of voice, where you don't have to compete against ads. Like, before this call, I hopped onto a premium publisher owned by a very large company just to see, clicked on the first ad on the homepage, or first article on the homepage. I saw a Coach ad next to a Amazon Video Prime ad, next to a Disney Cruise ad, next to an Adam and Eve ad, which was very random, and then next to a floating video play. And that's like, that's a premium experience in today's mindset, and like not super premium from a consumer perspective, and definitely not from an advertiser perspective that they saw that there.
Well, there's consumers are multidimensional for sure. And all of those ads might have been relevant to you. It's a different conversation, Greg.
But I knew I was going to open myself up to this one when I said it, but I was like,
wait, did you say you share a computer with your wife though? Is that what you said? So I think it's important. I think in the context of your business, it's important for the brands, I should say the specialty retailers, to understand who their consumers are, because it makes their inventory more valuable, right? Because I am multidimensional. I do think, to your point about all those ads being on one page, those ads are probably being served by a DSP, and it's not cheap inventory anymore. Like, we all know the ad tax on those impressions is probably 60% or more of the cost of that impression. So if you're spending all of that money on ad tax, just, so little of it goes towards the impression, why not scrap it all and put your ads in highly relevant places where you can be, you can be sit up straight and be like, okay, I'm proud of my brand being on this brand's website. I do think this is a bigger conversation, but I do think there's a reckoning coming for programmatic advertising, because I think that most of it's garbage. There's so much fraud. There's so much, like I said, ad tax. And I think it creates a certain laziness within the industry on the buyer side. No offense to people that do it. I understand why you do it. But I think it's it's easy, but it isn't necessarily the best option for your brand. So
Yeah, I
I think
agree
you're in
with
a good
you,
spot.
and I think that's another podcast in itself where we can
Yeah,
talk about that.
for
But it's
sure.
and yeah, some of it definitely is fraud, but I think a lot of it's just complacency. So it's the last thing I have to say about that is the push from an advertiser is to drive the lowest CPM possible. Do you ask the questions on how you're going to do that? Whether you do that direct buy and all that added value that you get to drive that CPM down, where do you think it's going? That SSP is reselling to another SSP that's reselling to another SSP to drive those down, and you lose the fact of where that ad's being delivered because it's hitting the impressions and like the tricks that publishers play by having the lazy loading with in view just so they can game the metric system on that that 1 second in view so they can get their dollars. Like
It's weird.
it
We used
comes
to
down,
care.
it
Sorry,
comes
but
down to an education perspective, or maybe just people just don't care because it's tied to their bonuses and they just want to run the impressions.
well, I think it's a lot of this has been self-created by the industry, right? Because agencies are having to operate on thinner margins, right? Their clients have squeezed them, so they have to figure out how do I do more with less as a business, which I understand. But I remember the days when I worked on the public. I worked at Yahoo, and my advertisers would say, "Send me a screenshot. I want to see my ad." Like, it's out the window. Nobody asks that question anymore. How do you do that? Right? It's like I mean, you really have to be lucky to come across your ad on the internet. So,
Yeah.
but let me ask you this: Is there I have to imagine that you're unique today, and you're early, which doesn't mean it's a good thing. And I have to imagine that some advertisers are like, or I should say, maybe some specialty retailers are like, yeah, I get it. I'll take the revenue because I know I'm not converting all these users, and it helps offset some costs. And I have to imagine there's some others that are still stuck in my brand is so important that I don't want any other brand, even if it's not a competitor, on my website. Like, have you
Yeah.
been able to figure out what the profile is of the right specialty retailers, or is it really a people thing? Is it really about understanding the person that's making those decisions?
It's twofold. So it's definitely a people thing, like focusing on people that have like P&L responsibility for it. But yeah, we've kind of narrowed it down. So if a retailer has any kind of post-transaction partner in place, the likelihood that they're more receptive to advertising either on their site or through their emails or through one of their other consumer touchpoints, because we do more than just the website. And if we can back that up with revenue projections, that makes sense. And again, they're in total control. Like, one of the unique things about us is it's a double opt-in approach. So we ask them like, hey, what categories included, excluded, so on and so forth, certain advertisers or partnerships you already have in place. So we take all that off the table right in the beginning. So yeah, the type of specialty retailer that we focus on right now, the ones that are more open to it are ones that are already monetizing in certain ways. And they haven't had a partner try to help them generate revenue upstream the way that we're doing it right now. And you're right, we're unique. Right now we're at one of one. That won't last much longer. We've had conversations with retail media networks and agencies that don't want to do non-endemic. So they're looking at us to be their partner for that because it doesn't fit their model. It's extremely expensive to spin up a media sales team to deal with media sales agencies. So that type of retailer, the ones that have the post-transaction, is very helpful. Other ones where, again, specialty retailers usually are the ones that are like selling their own products, but there's ones that curate product for a specific audience too. So like, we don't work with them, but think of like an REI, for example, the active outdoor lifestyle, or even Nordstrom's. It's a higher end retailer.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own retail media network right now. We don't work with them either. But there are other retailers, which I can't mention at the moment, that have retail media, and we can coexist. So retail media, it's not clicking off site. It's sponsored listings. It's usually like the fourth slot on the category or collection page, however they brand it. And that's okay. We can live in there. And like a perfect example is like, let's take Ulta or Sephora. Both have awesome retail media networks. But it's all internal stuff. Like what happened last year? Barbie came out. How big was that branding like budget? It was massive. I think it was like over $250 million or something like that spent on branding. They didn't tap into any of that. They could have if they thought about it. They're just not built that way. So you could take the branding dollars that reach your user base as a retailer while also still doing the retail media and the post-transaction if you're doing that as well. They can all coexist.
And these brands aren't doing anything, especially retailers aren't doing anything that is that revolutionary. And I mean, against the brand, right? My wife bought me a like a Poppy or like one of those, healthy sodas, and it was peach flavor, but it was all Barbie branding. Like, so they're licensing out their entire can, which is their brand. That's the only brand interaction I have is on that can. When I pick it up, I see their logo every time. Now I see Barbie. Like, they're confident enough in their brand that I'm not going to forget about them because they're monetizing the can with Barbie ads or whatever. I don't even know what
it's that perception of it too. So like that's a perfect example. A lot of specialty retailers are already doing brand partnerships. They just haven't been able to scale them. That's kind of where we're focusing is, hey, instead of just, you can keep doing the product sponsorship or like the co-branded product. So like I saw an ad the other day for Solo Stoves and Whistle Pig. It was on Instagram as a co-branded Solo stove.
Makes sense to me.
You can do that. That's cool. But like, why not take that up a notch and all that money, effort, and time that you've spent building a brand? Why not help drive that and turn that into an asset and turn it into revenue through different channels and different means? And it's not saying like, let's put Google AdSense on your website. We're not doing that. And how do we coexist? And like the biggest objection that we get from retailers is like, I don't want to click anyone off my site. No, don't want to ruin my conversion funnel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, understandable. You shouldn't ruin your conversion funnel. So some of the products that we have aren't clickable on purpose, and it's certain products that we have. So like be the free shipping sponsor for X, Y, and Z. But the other parts are when the ads are on the site, they click to a brand page, a microsite. It lives within the retailer domain, but it's branded for that advertiser, and it allows that advertiser to tell that brand story in a meaningful way and capture whatever data they want to capture as well, or whether it's just sharing a video because that's their initiative is to serve the creative that they have. Like, but it lives within the retail, and that's been eye-opening because the advertiser likes it because it allows them to get a bit more real estate. It's a branded content play for them as well. And then the retailer likes it because you're still, as a consumer, not being taken out of their world, their domain. So that audience is still there. And then if you want to do some lower funnel activations, let's go into those email activations and that. So like we're helping balance the needs of a retailer and the objections that they have, while also focusing on the advertiser and the objections is like, you've been in the business for a while, just like myself. It's usually like, hey, I need to be above the fold. I need to be viewable. I need the impression. So how do we balance that with a retailer being like, hey, I don't want anyone to leave my website. I don't want to mess up that conversion. So there's a fine line. And then, so we focus on 3 buckets. We have the on-site experience that we're curating. We have the email experience, and then we have some custom solutions as well that we're launching over the next quarter.
I was going to ask you about that. You mentioned the sponsored shipping. Is that a unique thing, or is that a product? Like how are you thinking about products versus custom?
Yeah, so it would be a product. So like that's one of the non-clickable things. So we work with a retailer that has a 45-plus-year-old audience, mainly female oriented, and there's different parts of that business where it's perfect for sponsorships. It's like, it's no different than Target renting out the front of their store to Starbucks. It's dead space to Target. It's meaningful to Starbucks. It generates revenue. So like taking all these similarities offline and bringing them online, like I live pretty close to TPC Sawgrass. and I was there for the players. And the parking lot was sponsored by Lexus, and you had preferred parking. Same concept. Why not take that to a retailer experience and start divvying it out in ways that make sense? I'm not saying just sell it to any brand. It needs to be relevant to your user, your consumer, your audience, whatever you call that. And it can't impact your core business as a retailer, which is selling goods. So,
sorry, I was just thinking about is it Back to the Future 3, where there's just branding everywhere. Right? Everything's got a brand in the show.
Everything's a sponsorship opportunity.
Everything's a sponsorship opportunity. But going back to what we were talking about earlier, like I personally am multidimensional, and so if I am shopping for a product, a Solo stove, for example, I also drink whiskey. So branding WhistlePig makes a whole lot of sense to me. And in fact, it's probably doing me a service as a customer, because now I'm being exposed to brands that maybe I wasn't thinking about prior, and that align. It's not going to take me away from Solo. I'm not going to buy my Solo stove because I saw it at WhistlePig, branding.
Exactly.
I think that brands just need to think about their consumer and what makes them, not just what's good for the brand, because there is a huge piece to the revenue until the retailer can figure out how to convert 50% of their website visitors.
Yeah, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon.
Not anytime soon. And look, there are I can see a day where retailers take the data of their shoppers, what they know about them from purchases, but also what they can gather through technology about the composition of that person, and start to build audiences for technologies like M3 to target again. So yes, maybe your website is primarily moms, but maybe I only want to put my sponsorship in front of moms who live on the western half of the country, who have 2 kids and drive a Lexus, right? I'm getting really targeted there, but you'd be able to do that if you'd own the data. And I think that's part of the ad tax right now, is you're paying so much for the data. This is just a better alignment for your brand.
And then once that data hops at least 1 degree, when it becomes second and third party data, it's not that relevant. Everyone's got it. Like a perfect example is like all the social platforms. I was looking. This is weird and super unique, but it's like I just bought a new car, and I was looking at like window tinting and ceramic shields just in the area. I looked at one company. Every single company in the area targeted me with an ad, because it helps their bidder get better by aggregating it. And it's no different than when I look at a direct to consumer brand's pair of pants or a shirt. I'm going to get all their competitors as well and their ads. And whether that brand knows it or not, like that data is all being commingled anyways. It's not being, it's all, what's the word I'm looking for right now, but it's all anonymized. But at the same time, like it's not that unique. That's the problem. It's like, it's not that unique of a data. So on the set, but so when you own it on your own site, it becomes unique. And that's why there's so much first party data conversations, all these things. I think some of it's overblown, but that's where it becomes unique. And kind of going back to your question of like the profile and some of the objections of a specialty retailer, I like to bring up Walmart, which Walmart's a unique beast. And this data is a little out of date. I think it's from 2022, but it's from McKinsey and Company. And it showed that Walmart Connect revenue was $2.7 billion. It generated $1.6 billion in operating profit. Do you know how many t-shirts, diapers, and groceries Walmart would have to sell to generate that same amount of profit?
Yeah.
$35.5 billion. So taking that same concept from a retailer, whether you're selling mugs, shirts, pants, the amount of revenue that you would have to generate or the profit that you could create from advertising and sponsorships, it makes sense to put it in part of your mix of revenue and create a new revenue channel.
Yeah. I like what you were saying before, though, about, because it is about social media, and it isn't just about what I search for. It's what I say, right? Because Instagram's picking up my ambient listening. I say something to my wife, and then boom, one of us is getting whoever's phone's nearby is starting to get ads on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm getting, to your point, different advertisers, and there's no ownership. All of a sudden, it's all the same to me. Like the brand don't even stand out, so that creates more relevancy for the brand to say, you know what, if I can get my brand on the right partners' websites, it's a premium I'm willing to pay. Now the retailer really needs to think about, oh, if I can get that much money for the impression, why wouldn't I do that? And then maybe there's some back and bartering or whatever. That's a whole different conversation. But God, this conversation can go in so many different directions. How are your clients, say advertisers, what is their KPI, given it's a branding play, but it is targeted? How are they measuring success to know whether they should continue to invest?
Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to a lot of just the branding KPIs that have been in place for a while. We're looking more into the attention economy as well, which we believe is pretty unique in our situation specifically because of being the only advertiser on site, no auto refresh, 100% share of voice within view. So like that type of stuff we are measuring right now, and we'll hopefully be able to share that soon on it. But like that's where attention becomes pretty interesting in that matrix of it, is because you can start measuring like the dwell time. So to give you another example, one of the slides that our media sellers use when they're talking to agencies is like they show the premium publisher today, a few different advertisers that would buy that premium publisher, and then one of our retailers. They show that the index of the audience skews higher towards the retailer that is sit on that premium publisher. They show that the age breakdown is very similar across the board. And then they show the dwell time is, nearly 2.5 minutes for the retailer versus less than 50 seconds for that publisher. And that's the average. So you got to think about the 10 seconds and all that stuff too. Like the exposure that an advertiser gets, and instead of just serving them, one ad on scroll, another ad on scroll, auto refreshing it, like having it be thoughtfully woven into a retailer experience on site through email activation and then maybe through some of their social channels, that resonates and that builds a lot more brand equity. Because like at the end of the day, premium publishers are trading that brand equity. That's what the advertiser is looking for. And the way that we look at it is that, retailers are not just shopping destinations, but they're brand powerhouses. They're investing heavily in storytelling and community building and loyalty, which is precisely what an advertiser is craving from that premium publisher, as well as what I haven't talked about are influencers as well. Like retailers can be an influencer too. You think about like the really big ones, they drive brand recognition and the trust that one of their consumers has with them can go much longer than some micro influencer or some other influencer that might be on TikTok or Instagram.
Yeah, that's what a specialty. Look at it. Say that's what a specialty retailer is selling in that case, right? Is that they're selling the reputation or the relationship that they built with that consumer. And to your point around comparing the specialty retailers' dwell time to the media companies' dwell time, I think users, and maybe I'm just speaking because I'm in the business, but I think it's true, we become numb to ad placements in those standard placements, right? Top, 720 by 90, 300 by 250. Like we don't even like focus on, like, we're just trained to like go around it. And where if you're integrated into a retailer website, you're more likely to notice the brand on those websites.
Yeah, there's a ton of studies about ad blindness that happen because there's just so many of them. It's like Times Square. Like I used to run huge social activations in Times Square. You'd be on, Gap's Facebook page. It would be on Times Square. It'd be a bunch of other places, and name a brand. We did activations. At the end of the day, it's really for the marketers that are at that brand.
Totally.
That are running Times Square ads. Like no one in Times Square is like looking at it. They see it for a second, but like it's mainly for the pubs, the trade organizations, and the advertisers that are doing it. That's why you go to San Francisco and you see all the B2B commerce companies have ads everywhere on the out-of-home billboards, because
talking to themselves.
It's stroking somebody's ego.
Yeah, totally. I was laughing this morning. I was looking at a tech company had I guess they were on NASDAQ, like on the ring the bell or something. And there was the head of sales or somebody from the company, like in a photo with NASDAQ on like the giant screen at Times Square. I'm thinking, who looks at that? Like, they don't know who this guy is or even what that company is. Like, these are consumers. This is a tech company, but it's for their own ego, right? How does the targeting work? Are advertisers buying are advertisers buying retailers, or are advertisers buying audiences?
So right now it's mainly retailers. So we're using the retailer as a proxy for context. Again, so if you're a new mom, you're shopping, most likely on Carter's, you're most likely on Motherhood. If you're active outdoor lifestyle, Decine, Body Glove, like, it makes sense in that aspect. You don't need much more data to tell you, and they have to back it up. So we're bringing it kind of back to basics on purpose, because I've seen firsthand all the data in the world and how much that doesn't really incrementally move the needle in used. So we're bringing it back to basics. We are doing things with data. We're not sharing it with anybody right now, but there's different things that we're looking at. But at the most simplistic form it's a proxy for context. If you're a specific consumer, you shop on certain retailer websites, then there's a huge list of other advertisers, brands that are relevant to you that may want to reach you in that particular area. And that's where we're stopping at the moment on purpose.
Yep. That mindset is so key, the context. Can you share with us, is there a common use case? In other words, I know that these are all custom or semi-custom because you're doing one-to-one advertiser to retailer, but is there a common use case? If someone's listening right now and they work for either a brand or a specialty retailer, an advertiser or specialty retailer, what's a common use case? You mentioned on-site, you mentioned other opportunities. Can you talk about what's a common compilation of ad units?
When we started M3, the vision was to help generate revenue for specialty retailers through any of their consumer touch points: on-site, off-site, in-box, and then in-store if it made sense for them. We've culled that back on purpose to focus purely on digital, just because of who we're speaking with, and it's a little bit easier to grasp for the buyers. And the use case would be, you are, we'll use back to school as an example. You're an advertiser looking to reach a parent back to school, which is coming up, starting to push that for July, going in through September. And you want to reach that audience. Usually you go do YouTube, you go do some other CTV, some premium publishers, maybe do a couple branded partnerships. And what we're saying is, hey, what do parents buy for back to school? They buy shoes, they buy clothes, they buy other things as well. Being a parent, my wife does most of it, but like, you buy a lot of it. So where does that person shop? And then we look at their needs as an advertiser and we say, okay, here's the retailers that we have for a mid to upper funnel exposure. Let's integrate on these retailers' websites in a thoughtful way, whether that's on their homepage, their category page, or other pages, any other high traffic pages that we can integrate into. The second one is, okay, for some of those lower funnel tactics, let's look at email. Traditionally, email's been like newsletters, dedicated emails, which are emails that are sent on behalf of an advertiser from a retailer, which are being done today on like one-offs. And then there's transaction emails, which no one's touching at the moment that we've seen. And how do we blend those? And the transaction emails are really interesting because those have such high open rates. I think Klaviyo says that like the open rate for a transaction email is over 60%. Those are those shipping confirmation emails, the shipping delivery emails, all those different updates, order confirmation. there's certain rules to those that you have to abide by to be into it. But how do you blend all that for the best return for the advertiser? And that's what we're focusing on from a use case perspective, is taking the initiative that an advertiser has, that they want to reach a specific kind of audience, consumer, whether that's a mom, whether that's a lady over 45, whether that's an active outdoor lifestyle, whatever the categories are. We look at a retailer base and say, for upper funnel, let's focus on the site. Here's a brand page if you need to get some, forms signed up for, or video completion that you can run on a brand page. For the lower funnel, you want to drive people to your site or to a certain landing page. You can do that through email. And then through social, you can tap into the retailer's handles, and whether it's organic or paid, reach their audience plus some on social as well. And then drive that back, because again, these specialty retailers have massive followings because they've spent so much money, time, and effort building them up as well. Whether that drives back to the brand or back to the retailer, or that drives back to the brand. And how do you blend all that together? And that's what we're focusing on in figuring out for the advertisers.
Do some of the specialty retailers start? For example, would they start with email as a product? And the reason I ask that is I have to imagine that there's going to be some specialty retailers that aren't there yet, right? They're not ready to put ads on their site, even in the context you've shared. How do you persuade them, like, hey, this is the future, this is an opportunity, this is a revenue stream you're missing out on? How do you edge them into this concept?
Some of the things you just said. So
fair enough.
So we do that. So it's like, it depends on the retailer. So again, going back to the beginning of this podcast, we had talked about kind of the type of specialty retailer we focus on. Ones that are already monetizing in some kind of capacity, whether that's post-transaction or not, or some other brand partnership activation, they're more keen to the idea. So how do we do it in a thoughtful way? So just kind of like, during my days at Criteo, where, a lot of my effort was getting publishers that either didn't have ads on their site, or ones that didn't have Criteo on, and just being like, showing them the value that it could be when done correctly. So showing where ads could be on page, how they could look, how other ones that we're doing could look, how this won't impact your conversion, how this won't impact your site speed, which is a big factor as well. How it's relevant because you're in control as a retailer. That's the biggest thing, is like, this is different than doing Google AdSense. This isn't selling just like a, below the fold belly fat ad that you might see on some of the stuff out there nowadays that I think we're all familiar with. It's none of that. These are relevant premium advertisers that your consumers have an interest in. So that's kind of how we get around it. So yeah, we can test with email first and do that. But in order to really tap into the revenue potential, you have to have the on-site component as well. So we can show them some of the Walmart data. We can show them some of the retail media data, the commerce media data, even some of the post-transaction data on that. It's like, if you back that CPC out, it's like a $250 CPM that they're really effectively charging. We're definitely not in those rates, but it's like, hey, this is what you could make based on your audience size that you have in the US, across mobile, across desktop. And in order to generate that type of revenue at the type of margins that you want, then there's got to be a little bit of give and take on it. And then it's really honing in and saying, if you're so focused on that conversion rate, and again, the average conversion rate's around 2%, let's just take that audience out and advertise to the 98%. It's no different than when I was at Criteo and I would try to get a publisher on board and be like, yeah, I'm not really sure. So let's monetize your European traffic, not your US traffic instead. Yeah. It's the same kind of concept. So let's not serve ads to that 5, 10, 15, 20%, doesn't really matter. User base that you think is going to convert, we'll serve it to the other ones first. in addition to doing email and some of the other activities as well, just to show you some of the value that can be created here. And
so
then
I was gonna say there's just some flexibility there.
There's flexibility
based on meeting the retailer where they're at, what they're ready to do,
Exactly.
and then ease them into it. I just have one question, digging into that a little bit. Have you tried? And I'm just curious, like who's your like who do you sell into at the retailer? Are you going to an e-commerce person, or are you going to the CFO? Or someone
CFO
else
sometimes, but it's usually like the president or the VP of growth, monetization, whatever their title might be. Somebody that has a vested interest in the P&L or revenue growth opportunities. That's where we're seeing the most success. And CEO, president, that aspect. CFO to time from time. Right now, not e-commerce, because I kind of equate e-commerce to the publisher or the editor at a publisher, where it's like, I don't want anything to impact my website. And we have worked with a few and they're great, but like, it's just more standoffish and more resistance because again, retailers are conditioned to say, I'm going to spend a ton of money on conversion rate optimization to get that 2% to that 2.1%. And I'm not going to do anything that I think is going to take away from that, because going back to your point about how we're kind of have ad fatigue, is most people's perception of advertising isn't great. But when done correctly and when done well, it can be pretty awesome. So like that's a hump that we have to get over from both sides. Is we're something new to an advertiser. So it's like we don't really fit into a bucket right now. So that's kind of hard.
Yeah, it's always hard
to understand. So how do we do that? Because like we're not retail media. We're not talking to the trade organization, the trade organizations or anything of that nature, or like the commerce teams in the aspect of like shopper marketing dollars. We're talking to like brand. We're talking to branded content. We're talking to the strategy and planning teams, because the budgets there are different from what a retailer would see. And like one of the big objections is like, I'm not going to put this ad on my site. The CPCs or advertising, whatever. It's like, no. There's performance dollars. And yes, that's really big. But like Uber spends more on branding than they do on performance. It's over $1 billion a year that they spend on branding. You don't even know that exists, or you're not even capturing that. And think of all the CPG brands and everybody else. Airbnb is another example I mentioned earlier. Like they're spending tons of money on branding that you can't see whatsoever. The post-transaction companies, they're focused on affiliate and CPC. And right now it doesn't make sense for that because it's different KPIs for both companies.
Yeah.
So those are some of the objections.
Yeah. And those brand advertisers are looking for more ways to advertise because people aren't watching TV as much, or they're not doing other things as much that maybe they spent brand dollars on before. A couple last questions on the data front. Are you collecting anything that's unique to, say, a retailer that maybe they would find interesting, as part of a relationship?
Yeah. So right now the data is the retailers. So we're not touching that on purpose because it's hesitations. We're getting walk before we run, getting to the idea of putting ads in environments that have never had ads before, whether they look amazing or whatever it might be. Like that's a big enough hurdle at the moment. So we don't even touch data. There's stuff that we're looking at. We're working with some retailers on how do we refine it and make use of it in a compelling way for them that we're looking at. But right now, just for all intents and purposes, we're not doing too much with data because, again, the retailers are proxy for things.
Got it.
And that's one of the benefits that a retailer likes about us is we're definitely not reselling data, and we're not collecting data in a way that would make us want to resell it or repurpose it in another capacity.
Just bringing in bags of cash.
That's the plan.
That's the idea. How easy is it to get started? Is it just a line of code? Is it just is it a div on their website? Like what do they have to do on the ad piece? Obviously, the email is a little bit different, but let's just talk about the on-site piece. How do they get integrated into your ad server?
Yeah, the hardest part is agreeing where the ad placements will be. That's the biggest component of it. Is like where's that trade-off between what an advertiser needs and wants in order to spend money with you as a retailer and what you're willing to give up. in a way that isn't going to impact your perceived business. So that's the biggest hurdle to get over. Once it's after that, it's ad tax like anything else, and it's relatively pretty easy to do. And they can reach out to us to have those conversations. My cell phone number has been the same for the last 25 years, or they can send us an email at hello@m-three.co.
And they'll also, shameless plug here, they'll also be able to find you on blurbs.ai, which is a new platform coming to market soon.
Nice.
And I'll let you check it out. I'll keep it a secret for now. What's the long-term vision for the company?
Yeah, it's a good question. So long-term vision is to build this into a lasting company. So, my co-founder, Mike, who's our CEO, he built Undertone to, a 300 person business. And he built BVA through acquisition to 300 to 500 people as well. Both of those businesses are still around to this day. And I've been the first employee at several companies that are still around. So we want to build something that's enduring. We want to build something that people are happy to be part of. And then from a product point of view, we want to hold true to our name, which is make merchants money, those specialty retailers, whether that's through advertising or other means, and offer other services that can help them generate. That's one of the biggest aspects of the business. And within the next year, in the short term, it's continue to productize some of the advertising products for on-site and through email, but also move to inbox components as well, because a lot of retailers do inbox initiatives at the moment through different partners. So how do we tap into that and help reduce some of their shipping costs and their return costs by helping them monetize that through other factors as well?
Excellent. Greg, this has been extremely informative. I appreciate the time that you spent inside the Matrix today. And we look forward to having you back soon and learning more about M3 in blurbs.ai and at your website. Give yourself a shameless plug as well, because your URL can be confusing to people. You're not M3 like the BMW.
No, we are not.
So what is your domain?
So it's m-three.co. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, or shoot me a text or call me at 413-244-3701.
You don't have to go that far. If someone's listening to this, then there'll be information in the show notes. They'll be able to find you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being inside the Matrix. Take care.
All right. You too.
This episode of the MarTech Matrix was brought to you by the Cogent Collective, a community of marketing and e-commerce leaders. Learn more at cogentcollective.com. For show notes and information on upcoming episodes, head on over to themartechmatrix.com. If you would like to learn more about the companies appearing on this podcast and see if they're a good fit for your company, send Sean a note at sean@cogentcollective.com. New episodes of the MarTech Matrix podcast will drop every Monday, so be sure to subscribe with your favorite podcast network so you can stay on top of what's happening in the Matrix.